Williams and Hyatt show. Matthew Tynan, Matt Tynan from SB Nation Pound the Rock blog, going to join us, talk Spurs, and I think the commission is going to have to back down over this. For those who don't know what we're talking about, San Antonio's Greg Popovich stars Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili, plus key role player Danny Green on a commercial flight home instead of playing them in a nationally televised game against the Miami Heat so they could rest out of the Spurs' Saturday home game against league-leading Memphis. NBA Commissioner David Stern issued a statement before the game started, apologizing to fans, saying this was an unacceptable decision by the San Antonio Spurs and substantial sanctions will be forthcoming. This is all over what happened Thursday night. After the game, Popovich, informed of Stern's statement, declined comment. Pop said, I'd never react to anything, don't know or haven't heard about. 105-100, the Heat needed the Ray Allen three with about 22 left to win it. The Spurs were in their fourth game in 5 nights, sixth game of a road trip, 11th road game in November. The Spurs should be telling the commissioner substantial penalties will be headed your way for this stupid schedule that you created for us early on in the year. A huge overreach that I don't think the commissioner expected the backlash that is coming. Right now, joining us on the show, he's an old-timer from around these parts, Matt Tynan, SB Nation's Pound the Rock blog, back with us again on the Williams Night Show. Matt, hope you're doing well. How are things going?
Oh, man, things are good. It's the NBA is entertaining in November. You know, who'd have thunk it? Things are good right now.
I guess maybe it was brilliant marketing by Stern, perhaps, to issue the statement before the game to get people to pay attention to it. But I am floored that they would make that statement, particularly after last year when Popovich did something very similar. The league reaction was, hey, it's coach's decision and they're doing what's best interest of the team, and that's well within the coach's discretion. Has anyone heard the reason of the flip-flop, or is it only because of the magic of LeBron?
It's a good question. I think the one thing you can point to is most of if not all of the other games, Popovich has done this for years. He's got the big three on certain back-to-back nights for years now. The only difference about last night was the fact that it was a nationally televised game against the Miami Heat. The other ones were games on Fox Sports Net against Portland and Utah and Golden State and the like. So I think really the big difference here was that, David got a phone call from old Ted Turner, telling him to send a message to Pop that, hey, you can't be sitting your stars on my night.
Yeah.
Not the night that we paid this kind of money to have you guys on. So, I think what it comes down to is just the money involved in a big nationally televised game.
It does open up to me a can of worms that if the commissioner thinks he can dictate that, what else can he dictate? You got to play certain players X number of minutes. You got to play, where does it end if this is acceptable? Rick Carlisle, Mavericks coach, is the president of the Coaches Association. He had some pretty, I would say, strong words for a guy who has to be diplomatic in that role. I got to think there's going to be a lot of backlash coming back at Stern on this, and I know this is his farewell ride, and he's trying to equal Roger Goodell for heavy-handedness, but I got to think that they've got to back down, don't you?
You would think so, which is just completely against David Stern's nature. He's as heavy-handed as it comes, and always seems to be, well, at least he thinks he's always right. So, a back down would be really, really surprising. There's only one precedent that I read about. In 1990, the Lakers sat Magic and Worthy on the last night of a season, and he fined him, $25,000, which by today's standards is pocket change. So, we'll see what happens in this capacity because David Stern rarely backs down from anything. But even if it's a fine, you're kind of struggling to see what kind of grounds he can base this on. He doesn't. It's not like he has jurisdiction in the area of personnel decisions by coaches. I mean, he doesn't really have a precedent in this capacity. This kind of thing happens all the time, especially with the Spurs. Where are the sanctions when the Warriors are tanking an entire month of the season last year? Where are sanctions against the Maloof brothers for trying to push their own team out of town in Sacramento? I mean, it just seems like such a such a hypocritical stance, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get away with it. And I guess they're meeting today, and maybe cooler heads will prevail. Maybe it was just an over-anxious, angry Stern last night prior to tip, but gosh, man, I'd really be surprised to see anything substantial, as his quote basically emphasized, that it would be substantial sanctions. I'd be surprised if anything substantial came down.
Visiting right now, Matthew Tynan, SB Nation's Pound the Rock. They cover the Spurs like nobody's business. They're out of San Antonio and beyond, so you need to bookmark that page, keep it on your browser. I would say make it your homepage, but thewilliamsknightshow.com just looks so good when it pops up. You know, I would just start there. But, yeah, so, I mean, and it's interesting. You mentioned the precedent, and there's a CBA, but the CBA basically exists as a covenant between the league and the players. Coaches are not unionized, and the commissioner rules at the behest of the owners. So this would basically be owners versus San Antonio as represented by Stern. It just, as you say, we're getting into really interesting territory that I just truly wonder, take Stern out of the picture. Do the other owners really want to go here at this point? Because if they can do it to San Antonio, what can they do to you?
Right. I mean, you talk about San Antonio, you're talking about a model franchise who's done nothing but good for the NBA and for David Stern over the course of Popovich's tenure. I mean,
made him a bunch of money.
Yeah, and you're talking about a small market, you know, one of the smaller market teams in the league that's been incredibly successful. So if you're going to do something like this to San Antonio, surely nobody else would be exempt. Well, the other thing is, you're talking about the owners. Keep in mind that Peter Holt was the lead man in the lockout negotiations alongside David Stern. He was the one that spearheaded Stern's crusade against the players to change the whole payment system and the contract situation. So when you bring up the owners, I can't imagine that they would be against the Spurs in this situation. When Peter Holt was a guy that was leading the way in terms of lockout negotiations, that most people would say the owners won. So, you know, if that's the question, I would be very hesitant to say that the owners would be in support of what David Stern is trying to do here.
Meanwhile, coming up Saturday night, the game that San Antonio was resting up for, Memphis comes in 11-2, San Antonio at 13-4. You can give me your little thumbnail on that, but I'm also interested in big picture San Antonio right now. Are they maybe playing better right now than you thought they might early on this year?
You know, it's not really. You know, when you talk about last season and the way they really got rolling, you know, keep in mind they did that without a training camp.
Yep.
They did that while you know, finding out that Danny Green was actually a player. They acquired they acquired Steven Jackson and Boris Diaw late in the year, not to mention Patty Mills. So this is a team that wasn't even complete until the playoffs started. Whenever you talked about this Spurs team, the only change was they got rid of James Anderson and brought over Nando De Colo. And talk about no-name players in last night's game. Reggie Miller couldn't even pronounce people's names in the game. So
well, he's no Cheryl Miller.
Right, he's no Cheryl Miller. That's for sure. But the only flip was James Anderson for Nando De Colo. And all of a sudden, with injuries to Kawhi Leonard and Steven Jackson, James Anderson is back in the mix. So this is basically the exact same team from last season. So if anything, it was the Spurs you'd expect to maintain that sort of excellence because they're the one team in the league that had, you know, next to no turnover. You talk about Memphis, they did keep their core intact. So, you know, that's another team where you can look at the success they're having and really understand it.
Yeah, it's, you know, I usually don't get really plugged in until, you know, Christmas or after with the NBA and everything else. But one thing I can always count on with the Spurs, at least, I'm going to see good quality basketball. And you just, you know, you look at their stats or whatever, you go, first overall in the NBA in assists per game. Nobody works harder in playing the game right than Popovich's team, and that's why people respond to it, I think, Matthew.
Sure. I'm with you there, and they're actually they're actually averaging more assists per game this year than they were last year. And we all remember, you know, what kind of a machine they turned into late in the regular season. You know, it's been an interesting season so far. You know, Popovich looked at last night's game back in July when the schedule came out. He said, "Hey, my big three aren't playing in that game." It was the sixth game in 9 nights. It was the Heat's third game in 12 nights. So, I mean, even if the big three would have played, you got to look at it and say, "Hey, the Heat had a holiday over Thanksgiving while the Spurs were on the road." You know, yeah, maybe the effects of the turkey was still there for Thanksgiving, but for the Heat, but who knows? You know, the last time the Spurs went into Miami, they got dump trucked by 30. So, with the schedule the way it is, it's even kind of surprising the Spurs have gotten to the point they are now record-wise. That you talked about it before I came on with 11 road games in the first month of the season. A little bit insane. You know, David Stern apologized to the fans last night on behalf of the Spurs. I think maybe David Stern should be the one apologizing to the fans of Miami for giving the Spurs that kind of schedule heading in.
I would agree. Matt Tynan, SB Nation's Pound the Rock. If we go to the site, what are we going to see in the coming days there?
Well, I got my column up last night, kind of on the Popovich issue. I'm awaiting a ruling on Dictator Stern here to see what he brings down.
Watch it.
But other than that, I'm sure we'll have some literature up in that regard. But man, we got stories up every day, off the wall and straight news stuff. So whatever you're looking for, if you're interested in the San Antonio Spurs, which I know there are more Dallas fans out there in West Texas. I was a part of that. But you know, stop on by. I'm sure we got something that'll entertain you.
If I make my way down to the Alamo City, is the SB Nation expense account big enough? Can you take me somewhere? Where will we go on the SB Nation dime if we went out for supper?
You know, man, we've been going out. I can't remember if there's one in Lubbock right now, but we've kind of been heading out to Fox and Hound after the game. So, all
right.
So ain't too bad.
All right. Well, I'll keep that in mind. We have you locked in on the cell phone, so if we get close, I'll give you a holler. Hey, it's good to hear your voice back on the station. I know you're doing well, but it's good to have you back on, and we will be picking your brain through the season, Matt.
All right, man. Ryan, I'll talk to you later. Always good to hear from you, man.
Thanks. Take care. Matthew Tynan, everybody. SB Nation's Pound the Rock.